as the country, of course, goes into level 4 of the lockdown from next week Friday, cabinet ministers are later today expected to provide details on what industries will be allowed to operate and explain, of course, how the sale of things like cigarettes will be rolled out and how people would be allowed to exercise, amongst many other things. And to help us understand those different dynamics is our senior political reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who joins us once again now in studio for exactly that. So, Ziyanda, a big part of the success of the sort of phase we're entering hinges on clarity, right? There needs to be very clearly outlined regulations about what can and can't happen, lest this all just falls apart.
Definitely. I mean, and the devil is in the detail, Ayanda, and that is really what we're expecting to hear from the ministers, how this gradual and phased reopening of the economy will work. And of course, you know, the president also speaking about small businesses. So we need to hear, for an example, from Small Business Development Minister Khumbudzo Ntshabane about how, you know, this is going to happen. Who will get to be, you know, reintegrated into the economy, because as I already said before, that there is a sense that level 4 is really not that different to level 5, which is of course the hard lockdown, barring a few industries being allowed to start operating again. But essentially it's almost saying that the lockdown has been extended without explicitly using those words, which I think is quite clever, because I mean essentially movement is still going to be largely restricted, no interprovincial movement, and really the president saying that it will be left to the bureaucrats and the technocrats of the state to determine which industries get to be reintegrated, but also saying that they will only allow to bring in no more than a third of their workforce back at work, which some people have actually criticized to say, you know, government, how are they actually placing such a restriction, because you may not know the needs of the business. What if the business cannot fully operate without, let's say, 50% capacity of its staff complement? So, as I said, the devil will ultimately be in the detail. We heard the president saying, you know, citizens will be allowed to exercise. Does that mean that gyms are going to open, or does it mean you're only going to be allowed to jog? And if you're allowed to jog on the streets, are you going to have to provide some form of identification? You know, all those things that we've seen during the hard lockdown, we need to know who will need to have a permit as well, and what kind of identification may or may not be required of citizens. And so these are all the things that I think the ministers must communicate. But of course, Ayanda, we know that sometimes with all these long briefings, there can be an additional confusion.
Absolutely, and that's exactly where I was going to go, right? So you've covered some of these briefings, for better or for worse, and you know, for the most part, there's an appetite for the detail, but you know, the duration of how long they go, for instance, and the ways through which the information is delivered sometimes leaves a lot to be desired.
Yes.
How effective do you think this type of disseminating the information has been, and are there lessons to be learned from how we've been doing things until this far?
Well, I think in terms of how government has been communicating, I think there are certain people that citizens have enjoyed hearing. For an example, Dr. Zweli Mkhize has been an authority when it comes to where we are in the numbers, where we are likely to go, what needs to be done. Whereas you have other ministers where citizens have felt that they are using an iron fist, that they're actually abusing the power that comes, of course, with the country being declared a national disaster, which also by implication means that effectively, you know, opposition parties also don't have much power in terms of how our system works. Everything becomes centralized with government. But I think, like you've mentioned, the duration of the briefings is one thing, which has also led to some believing that even some of the ministers make things up as they go along without any of the things that they say or regulations that they announce being evidence-based, not much clarity on that, especially as we saw when it came to the ban on the sale of hot food. Many were questioning, what is the science behind it? How does that curb the spread of coronavirus, for an example? And really, I know that there have been many who've come out to say they would much rather prefer to have very few people speaking, that communication be centralized, have either the president or the health minister speaking on certain issues, but we know that's not necessarily possible if there are specific issues that relate to a particular department, such as labor, where you need to, detail what is the process, what's been happening with the UIF, how bad is the backlog, etc., etc. So it'll be very interesting to see, because initially, one got the sense that citizens were confident when you have the minister actually addressing it. But I think as time has gone by, there is a sense that, the ministers themselves are creating a level of confusion, which is why you've seen continuously this need coming from citizens to say, when is the president going to address us? What is the latest? What exactly is happening? So it will be very interesting to hear how, the ministers will be communicate the implementation of the various regulations, and whether or not they will be practical, and whether or not citizens believe that this is actually a gradual and phased reopening of our economy.
Of course, as soon as that briefing starts, we'll take it live here on Newsroom Africa. Do we have an indication of the time that we might be able to, begin engaging with the ministers yet?
Well, we understand that it was meant to take place at around 10 o'clock, but it's not clear if it's actually still going to happen, Ayanda, because at the same time we know that the president is also going to be going on a site visit in Gauteng to actually assess the readiness of some of the facilities that have been set up to accommodate the expected increase in the number of infections. So we know how government has split it up, is that those who are severely sick because of coronavirus will be accommodated at hospitals, whereas if you test positive but you're asymptomatic, you're likely to be kept in one of the facilities, such as the one that's been set up in Nasrec.
All right, we'll leave things there, at least for now. Thank you once again for getting us into the picture so well. Ziyanda Ngcobo is our senior political reporter here on Newsroom Africa. Once again, as soon as that ministerial briefing begins, we'll make sure to bring it to you live right here on Newsroom Africa as those details unfold.